From the News Channel 5 network, this is OpenLine.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to OpenLine. Glad you're with us tonight. I'm fascinated by tonight's topic. We're talking about misinformation and conspiracy theories. How do they take hold? How do they spread? Are some people more likely to be drawn in by these things, misinformation, conspiracy theories, and why? What would be the predisposition that would make some people more likely to believe this as opposed to others? And I think in some way we're all susceptible to this, and we may know someone who is actively following or involved in some of this. So I'm fascinated by this topic. I think it's an important topic for our time, and we're going to approach it from an interesting sort of angle. And I'm very happy we have with us Lisa Fazio, Vanderbilt Psychology professor. So we're going to look at it from the psychology angle of this. So Dr. Lisa Fazio, thank you again via Zoom. We appreciate you being here. Thank you.
Yeah, happy to be here. One of my favorite things to chat about, too.
Well, good. All right. I mean, people have said we're living in a post-truth world where there's just so much information, misinformation that's out there. I guess we have a lot of information, so there's a lot of misinformation. Do you think we're seeing more of that kind of thing now, or has it always been this way? I mean, how would you say where we are right now as far as misinformation and conspiracy theories?
Yeah, so I don't love the term post-truth world. I don't think that's where we are. I think people do still value the truth and want to find out what the true information is. But it's also true that misinformation and false information spreads faster and farther than it ever has before. I don't know if there's more of it now. There's always been false information spreading throughout society. It's a constant kind of throughout human history. But right now, instead of being kind of one guy at a corner passing out pamphlets with his crazy theory, it can be someone advertising to an audience of thousands or hundreds of thousands on a social media site. And so the spread of this false information is much more prevalent than it used to be.
Well, I guess that makes absolute sense. Yeah, definitely. You can go on social media and spread things very quickly, and it used to be just one person on a corner. That's a good point. Are there some psychological foundations for people that are more susceptible to believe misinformation or conspiracy theories, or are we all equally susceptible to this?
Yeah, so I think all of us are vulnerable to believing false information. So we often like to think that that only happens to other people and that you yourself wouldn't be fooled. But we often are. One of my favorite kind of simple examples is if that I ask you, how many animals of each kind did Moses take on the ark? Most people will immediately say 2. Even though they realized that it was actually Noah and not Moses who took the animals on the ark. And so this just shows that our brain often takes shortcuts. And so rather than searching through everything you have in your head and making sure that Noah is the biblical character that goes with animals on the ark, your brain just looks if it's good enough. And kind of biblical character, close enough, it moves on and you don't notice that error. And so that's one way that misinformation can easily be believed by people, is even if you have the correct information in your head, often you'll ignore it in the moment because it just doesn't raise any flags for you.
Because we're kind of in a hurry. Would you say?
Yeah.
And would you say that we have a predisposition to kind of believe things are true? I mean, we see it or we hear it and we're like, yeah, sure, that's right. Do we have that sort of predisposition?
Yeah, definitely. And that's part of just humans being social creatures. We talk to each other, we trust one another, and the vast majority of things that people say to you are true. And so it's a good belief to have. If every time you tell me kind of what you did for breakfast or what you did the night before or the last movie you saw, I have to be thinking about, well, maybe he's lying, maybe this isn't true. That's a lot of distrust, and it prevents us from having kind of conversations and a lot of societal good things.
And so, yeah, we're in a hurry. We kind of skip over things that would allow us to maybe miss the ARC example that you gave. Do you think now there are people that are formulating conspiracy theories or misinformation, putting it out there intentionally, who are trying to take advantage of our predisposition to trust and our inclination to kind of move along quickly and kind of read over things quickly? Are there people that are trying to intentionally spread these things that take advantage of our predispositions?
Yeah, definitely. So you have a few groups doing it. So one, you have foreign governments who are trying to kind of manipulate opinion in the U.S. And who put out disinformation, trying to fool people and get them to believe things that aren't real. You also have profiteers. For a while, you could make good money on Facebook by putting kind of false information in there and counting on the links and the advertising revenue that you would get. So we saw a lot in 2016 of these fake news sites that people would run with crazy headlines just to get the clicks and to get the advertising dollars.
And what are some things that kind of stand out to you right now? So are there conspiracy theories out there that kind of stand out to you that are being studied? What are some areas of misinformation or conspiracy theories that are out there right now?
Yeah, so obviously the biggest conspiracy theory right now is QAnon, and this kind of complicated theory that there are people deep within the U.S. government who are actually pedophiles and kidnapping children and actively involved in these kidnapping rings. You also see a lot of misinformation and disinformation around the protests happening right now. People claiming that Antifa's about to come into a town and have some big rally that's not actually true, or just trying to inflame both sides of the argument. So you'll see foreign governments, their agents will often do this, where they'll just post with anonymous accounts, things that are very strong on one side and the other, just to try and incite violence and conflict among Americans.
That first one, QAnon, fascinates me. Now, I have some information on it right here. We're talking about the world is run by Satan-worshiping pedophiles who are plotting against President Trump while operating a global child sex trafficking ring. Many of them also believe that in addition to molesting children, members of this group kill and eat their victims in order to extract a life-extending chemical from their blood. So that is one of the big conspiracy theories out there right now. That sounds so insane. How could anyone believe that? And yet it's really big. So how is that possible? It's hard for me to wrap my head around that, but help me with that. How is that possible?
Yeah, so one thing is that people don't believe these theories kind of wholeheartedly in the first go. It's a slow process of getting there, where first maybe you believe that Donald Trump is being unfairly persecuted. And so that allows you to think and accept the idea that maybe there are people in the government who are actively plotting against him. And then once you believe that, then maybe you believe that some of them are pedophiles, and then. And so once you've accepted a few of the initial premises, you become more and more open to the other ones. And one of the general things about conspiracy theories is kind of there's no one that you believe you can trust. And therefore, there's also often no evidence that you'll accept that this theory isn't true.
And these are tough times. We're in the middle of a pandemic. There's social unrest. People are struggling in so many ways. And does that then open the door for more of these things to surface and for people to look toward them to help answer problems they may have?
Definitely. I think we're living in a time of a lot of uncertainty right now. We don't have good answers of when the pandemic's going to be over, what we should be doing, how to deal with childcare and schools, and all sorts of different things. And in times of uncertainty, that's a time that conspiracy theories can really take hold and take root. One of my favorite articles recently was by my colleague, Dr. Dana Young, who lost her husband very young from a brain tumor. And so she's got this great article where she explains how she basically became a conspiracy theorist while he was dying, because she just couldn't understand how he could be attacked with this cancer at such a young age. And so because she was dealing with so much uncertainty in her life, she kind of dove into internet web boards and tried to search for things that could have caused the cancer and came up with all sorts of theories. And eventually what got her out of it was her husband actually telling her, hey, this is just something that happened. It's just a fluke. Nothing caused it. There's nothing that anyone did wrong. It's just, it is. And then she was finally able to kind of accept the diagnosis and realize that a lot of the things she was believing had no basis in truth.
Fascinating. There are real world implications if growing numbers of people believe things like QAnon or things like the coronavirus isn't real. They're real life implications when these things take hold and they spread like wildfire. And so is there research being done on just how do we deal with people that maybe they are, obviously they're living in uncertain times, we all are, and we're turning towards something to make sense of it all, and then we land where we land with some of this stuff that can be dangerous. I mean, is there research about how do you combat people turning to these things for answers?
One of the best things that we can do is try and flood kind of the information airways with good information instead. So a lot of people have talked about how we're not only living in a pandemic right now, we're also living in an infodemic where there's a lack of good information, particularly about coronavirus. And though that lack of information really leaves a space for misinformation and conspiracy theories to sprout up and grow from. So if we don't yet know how the virus is best transmitted, what we can do to protect ourselves, can people get reinfected, will there be a vaccine? All of that uncertainty is really fertile ground for conspiracy theories.
So that's interesting, an infodemic, a lack of good information. But in this day and age, you can surround yourself with almost any kind of information that makes you feel better. I mean, if you believe one thing, you can surround yourself with information that will really make you feel good about what you believe, and it would demonize anyone who provides information contrary to that. So I guess I agree that there's a lack of good information, but even the good information that is out there is sometimes dismissed. And so how do we deal with that? What do we do about that?
Yeah, so one thing is just people need to be open to listening to people from kind of both sides and evaluating the evidence. Another thing is to pay attention to how many kind of reputable sources are saying whatever it is that you're listening to. If you can only find it from one source, it's probably false. Almost anything that happens today in America will be reported on by many, many organizations who will all say very similar things. And if so, you've got one source that's saying something different, you might want to look further into that. Occasionally they might be right and they might be onto something that everyone else missed, but most of the time it's because they're not saying what's true.
I've read about this QAnon, and sometimes they say it's compared to a church in the sense that it does give people a sense of community. Is that right? Again, in these
Yes.
uncertain times, you have access to this knowledge that not everyone has, and only there's a small group that is aware of it, and you're kind of on the inside, and it gives you this sense of community that, again, in a time like this, maybe many people are lacking. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. A lot of what people are gaining here is this sense of community, this sense that they know something that other people don't, that they're a member of kind of a secret club that knows all of these things. All of that can be really powerful. And it's particularly worrisome for kind of teenagers, young adults who are just coming into their own and starting to criticize the world and think about the world. They're often particularly susceptible to these types of conspiracy theories.
And what have you seen, I guess, as a psychology professor? Have you seen, obviously you can't give names or anything, but what sort of things have concerned you that you have seen in the last 6 months or so?
I mean, I think one thing that's concerning is that you can see people kind of fall down this rabbit hole or become radicalized over time. One thing researchers have been fighting for is for YouTube to change their algorithm so that it doesn't lead people to more and more extremist videos and more false information. There was a study a few months ago showing that kind of if you just let YouTube autoplay from a bunch of kind of innocuous normal videos, if you just follow it along, eventually you'll end up with a video that's talking about a conspiracy theory or false information or very fringe material.
That's very interesting. Yeah, so you could start out with something on YouTube and wind up somewhere really dangerous. And is there an age group? Is there an age group that you find that is more susceptible, or is it all ages?
All ages. So there's a few things. So one, teenagers can be particularly looking for the sense of community and for kind of advice and outside support that's not their parents, and so they can be particularly vulnerable. You also see that older adults and retirees, they actually happen to be the people who see the most false information on their social media feeds and the ones who share the most false information on their social media feeds. And it's unclear right now if that's because they don't, they're not as good at digital literacy and understanding that the site they're looking at is unreputable versus reputable, or if it's because they're using social media differently, and so they're seeing a lot more kind of pages and organizations and groups posting rather than family and friends. But that's another group that sees a lot of it.
So at the top of the show, I mentioned this notion that we're living in a post-truth world. And you said, no, we're not. You don't believe we're living in a post-truth world. Could we be heading toward that? Are you concerned we're heading toward that? Or do you think we won't get there?
I'm concerned that we're heading to a world where people don't trust institutions, where they don't trust the news media, where they don't trust the government. And when we don't have any institutions we can trust in, there's a lack of trust of other people, and you really can't have a well-functioning society without that level of trust. So that's one thing that I'm really worried about right now.
And what do we do about that? I would agree with you. I'm worried about that. So what do we do about that?
Yeah, it's tough. Part of it is making sure that some institutions remain non-political. I've been upset over the past few months about how the FDA and WHO seem to have been kind of swayed by political implications rather than remaining nonpartisan. I think news organizations can do a better job of telling the public why they can be trusted and being transparent with the reporting they're doing and kind of all of the steps that happen to produce a news story. That it's not just that some reporter goes out and writes whatever they think might be true, but that there's actually a number of steps of contacting sources, checking with other people, fact checking, all sorts of things that go into seeing the news that you do.
Yes, there is definitely the thought that I hear out there that the news media wants this, or the news media is doing this, as if the news media has a meeting at 9 in the morning and then get our marching orders and we all go out and follow those orders. Obviously that's not the case, But you're probably right. We should be incredibly transparent about what we're doing. People should look for more than one source for where they get their information. But again, what concerns me about that is this notion that, well, I've got the secret, I've got access to something no one else has, and everyone else is kind of just foolish, and I've got the truth. And that's what this QAnon does. It kind of, someone on the inside is giving drops of truth out there, and that's tough to combat.
It is. These are huge societal problems that there aren't any simple solutions to. But I agree that that's things that we should be worrying about.
All right, we're going to take a break. And if you want to call in, there is the number at the bottom of the screen, 615-737-PLUS, 615-737-7587. That kind of sets the table. We're talking about misinformation, conspiracy theories. How are they spread? How do they take root? Are more people than others susceptible to believing in them? You know, fascinating discussion. We'll take a break. Be back right after this.